In a galaxy where size means power and silence means defeat, one tiny alien princess dares to rise against a council of giants who see her as nothing more than a joke. But when a sharp-witted human soldier sees her for who she truly is, everything begins to change. Betrayals, battles, and a voice that refuses to be ignored. This is not just a fight for respect, it's a fight to rewrite destiny. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and show a big thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move toward this wonderful story that proves even the smallest spark can light up the stars. In the center of the Grand Assembly Dome on the planet Taliros, the air shimmered with energy. Delegates from across the galaxy sat on elevated platforms that curved around the chamber like a bowl of stars. Voices of different pitches and tones echoed through the dome, filling it with overlapping discussions, official debates, and the occasional low chuckle of amusement. From towering beings made of living crystal to fish-eyed diplomats floating in hover chairs, the room was loud, alive, and absolutely overwhelming. And somewhere in the middle of it all stood Princess Nyari of the Quora, a figure so small and quiet, most didn't even realize she was there. Nyari barely reached the waist of the shortest ambassador. She wore ceremonial robes woven from cloud silk, shimmering in soft pastel shades of her homeworld. A delicate circlet of star lace sat on her head, but it did little to boost her height or her presence. The Quora were a peaceful race known for their knowledge and creative inventions, not for their strength or size. And in a galaxy where power was often measured in muscle or military, the Quora had faded into the background long ago. Nyari knew it. She had grown up hearing the stories, how her people once helped build the energy grid for 5-star systems, only to be later replaced by stronger, louder, more aggressive species. Now, no one called on them. No one respected them. And no one listened to her. She walked quietly through the rows of seats, her head held high, even as her heart pounded with uncertainty. Every now and then, she caught a look thrown in her direction, some amused, some dismissive. "There goes the doll. Princess," someone whispered behind her. More ceremony, no substance. Her fingers clenched the edge of her sleeves, but she said nothing. She was here to speak. She was here for her people. And she refused to be driven back by cruel words and crueler smiles. At the far edge of the dome, a human leaned against a tall stone pillar. He wasn't part of the council. His uniform, gray with silver trim, marked him as security, one of the soldiers assigned to keep the peace during the session. Sergeant Cole Danner looked bored, but his eyes missed nothing. He watched the room like a hawk in orbit, noting every raised voice, every twitch of unease. When his eyes landed on Nyari, he paused. She didn't look like much. That's what the others seemed to think too. But Cole had seen her walk the room with purpose. She didn't slouch, didn't flinch. That said something. He nudged the officer beside him. "Who's the small one?" "That's Princess Nyari." "From the Quora," the officer replied with a laugh. "Tiny folks from some mist-covered moon, basically irrelevant. No one's taken her seriously in years." Cole's brow raised. "Then why's she here?" "Who knows? Maybe she thinks one more speech will change everything." He didn't respond. Instead, he watched her as she made her way to the viewing balcony outside the dome, alone without fanfare, like a shadow trying not to be seen. He waited a moment, then pushed away from the pillar and followed. The balcony was quiet, lit only by the twin suns setting behind the tall glass towers of the city. Nyari stood near the edge, her hands resting on the railing. Her shoulders were stiff, her eyes heavy with thought. Cole approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Beautiful view," he said casually. She turned, startled. "Who are you?" "Sergeant Cole Danner, Earth Coalition. Just part of the background noise," he replied with a small smile. "You looked like you could use a moment away from the chaos." Nyari gave him a cautious look. "If you've come to laugh at me, you're too late. That happened back in the chamber." "Wasn't planning on it," he said, stepping beside her. "Actually, I was wondering how someone so small could stand in a room full of giants and still look like she belonged." She blinked. They don't think I do. Cole shrugged. Maybe, but the way you held your head, that's not weakness. That's stubbornness. I respect that. For the first time in hours, Nyari's lips twitched in a small, unsure smile. They don't want to hear what I have to say. That's usually the case when you're saying something worth hearing. She didn't respond immediately. She just looked out at the fading light, the stars beginning to shimmer in the darkening sky. My people used to build the things these delegates now take for granted. We helped power this alliance once. Now, we're seen as fragile and forgettable. My father sent me here to change that. To speak. But when I do, it's like I'm not even in the room. Cole leaned on the railing beside her. That's because you're not shouting, but sometimes the quietest voice can cause the biggest shift if the right people are listening. Nyari glanced at him, a question in her eyes. And are you listening, Sergeant Danner? He smirked. You've got my attention, Princess, and I don't hand that out for free. A brief silence settled between them, not heavy, but thoughtful. Nyari turned back toward the dome. Her resolve was returning, small and quiet, but stronger than before. Cole watched her go and knew somehow that something important had just begun, and none of the giants in that room were ready for it. The next morning, the assembly dome buzzed louder than usual. Lights flickered brighter. Security. Presence was doubled and whispers traveled faster than sound. Something had shifted, though most couldn't quite name it yet. At the center of the storm was someone many had never truly noticed before, Princess Nyari of the Quora. She had returned to the chamber dressed not in soft silks, but in a simpler robe of deep violet, her hair tied back, her eyes sharp with focus. No grand entrances, no escorts. Just her, walking through towering diplomats like a stream cutting through stone. Some watched her with curiosity now, not just mockery. Others still laughed, but their laughter sounded less certain than before. Sergeant Cole Danner leaned against his usual pillar, arms crossed, lips twitching with a knowing smirk. He'd seen her the night before, uncertain, yes, but not broken. He admired that. He didn't know what she had planned, but something in his gut told him it was going to matter. The speaker at the front of the room tapped the crystal orb that controlled the sound field. The echoing voices faded into silence. We now return to the matter of interspecies trade tariffs between the Dravix Dominion and the Alvari Consortium. Nyari didn't wait. She stepped forward from her usual seat at the edge of the chamber, her tiny form barely visible between the legs of delegates, towering above her. She didn't ask for permission. She simply walked straight to the central speaker's platform. Gasps rippled through the room. Protocol had been shattered. Some delegates leaned forward, stunned. Others crossed their arms, clearly annoyed. The Dravix ambassador, General Thurak, stood up slowly, his massive shoulders casting a shadow across 3 rows. What is the meaning of this interruption? He growled, his voice like cracking boulders. Nyari didn't flinch. She stepped up onto the dais, stood tall, at least as tall as she could, and addressed the chamber. Her voice wasn't loud, but the sound field made it carry, smooth and clear. Do not speak to interrupt trade deals or argue over resources. I speak because my people, the Quora, have been ignored for generations. We are engineers, thinkers, and builders, but our size has made us invisible to you. That ends today. Pause filled the air, heavy and uncertain. Whispers rose like wind against dry leaves. You do not need pity, she continued. We do not want handouts or sympathy. We want recognition. A seat at this table, a voice in this alliance. General Thurak let out a slow, mocking laugh. A voice? From the Quora? You bring toys to a warrior's council and expect us to listen? More laughter joined his, sharp and cutting. Nyari stood still. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides, but her gaze never dropped. We may be small, she said, her voice firmer now. But we are not weak. Thurak's smile faded. He narrowed his eyes. Then prove it, he said suddenly. If the Quora want to be taken seriously, let them stand in the arena of merit. One-on-one combat, like our ancestors once did. A murmur swept through the chamber like a wave. The arena of merit hadn't been used in years. It was a tradition of the old days, now mostly ceremonial. But the rules still stood. If a representative accepted the challenge and won, their standing would rise in the eyes of the council, and if they lost, their cause would be considered dishonored. Forgotten. I accept, Nayari said, before she could talk herself out of it. The chamber erupted into chaos. You're mad, someone muttered nearby. She's going to get crushed. From the corner of the room, Cole's stomach dropped. He pushed through the crowd and caught up with Nayari as she left the platform. Princess, he hissed under his breath, falling into step beside her. What the hell was that? She looked up at him, her face calm but pale. They wanted proof, I'll give it to them. Nyari, Cole said firmly, this isn't a joke. Do you know who they're going to pit you against? A Dravix warrior? Those guys punch through walls for fun. I'm not backing down, she said. If I do, it confirms everything they believe about me, about my people. Cole exhaled, slowly, trying to find the right words. Then we need to get ready. You're not going to beat them with strength. She gave him a sideways glance. I'm aware. You're going to beat them by being faster, smarter, and impossible to hit. Nyari's lips twitched into the smallest smile. You sound like you've done this before. Let's just say humans don't always win with size either, Cole replied. But we're annoyingly clever when cornered. That evening in a quiet training chamber near the human quarters, they began to prepare. Cole showed her how to move, how to stay just out of reach, how to strike fast and vanish before retaliation. He handed her a stun rod, lightweight and perfectly fitted for her hand. What is this? She asked, examining it. Something the Dravix won't expect. It won't kill, but if you hit the right spot, it'll drop even a beast. She practiced until her arms ached. She fell, she stumbled, she got back up, and each time, Cole was there, steady and calm. Again, he'd say. You're getting closer. As the moons rose high over Talaros, Nyari collapsed against the wall, breathless. I can't win, she whispered. You can, Cole said gently, kneeling beside her. You just have to stop trying to fight like them. You're not them, you're better. She met his gaze, eyes glassy with fear, but shining with something else too. Hope. The fight was coming, whether she was ready or not. But for the first time, she truly believed she had a chance. The arena was quiet. Too quiet. Thousands of seats circled the round stone pit in the center of the assembly grounds, each one filled with curious or skeptical onlookers. Above, banners of 100 worlds flapped gently in the warm wind, but all eyes were fixed on the two figures standing across from one another. On one side stood Rokan, the Dravix champion, a mountain of a being nearly 3 meters tall, his skin glowing faintly with internal heat, his fists like metal anvils. On the other side stood Princess Nyari, a small figure wrapped in a light suit of flexible armor, holding nothing more than a slim stun rod in her right hand. The announcer's voice echoed across the stone arena. By the law of merit, Princess Nyari of the Quora and Champion Rokan of the Dravix will engage in combat. No assistance. No mercy. The outcome shall decide the standing of the Quora within the stellar assembly. Nyari didn't move. Her heart beat so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She heard no cheers, only murmurs of doubt, scoffs from those watching, and one low, cold laugh from Rokan himself. Do you know what I do to insects, little one? He growled, his voice like rolling thunder. I crush them. Nyari swallowed hard and raised her stun rod. Try me. The moment the signal flared, Rokan charged. The ground trembled under his steps, dust lifting around his feet. His first punch came like a falling star. Nyari barely rolled out of the way, the stone cracking where she'd been standing. The audience gasped. She scrambled upright and dodged, again as his wide arm swept at her head. She couldn't afford to take even one hit. She wouldn't survive it. Cole stood at the very edge of the viewing balcony, fists clenched, every muscle in his body tense. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, eyes locked on her tiny figure. "Don't let him catch you." Down in the arena, Nyari did just that. She moved like wind, quick, unpredictable, impossible to corner. Rokan roared in frustration, swinging harder, faster. But his size worked against him. His blows were powerful but clumsy. Nyari ducked low, flipped sideways, and rolled between his legs. She spun and jabbed her rod at the back of his knee. Sparks flew. Rokan stumbled. The crowd stirred. That hadn't been expected. Rokan snarled and turned, but Nyari was already gone, dodging another wild swing and striking under his arm. Each move was precise, just as Cole had taught her. Behind the knee, under the ribs, the side of the neck. The rod sizzled each time it connected, sending jabs of electricity through his massive frame. "You coward!" Rokan bellowed. "Fight properly." "This is how I fight," Nyari replied, breathless but steady. "And you're losing." The words struck harder than her rod. Rokan's rage boiled over. He stomped the ground, sending cracks in all directions. He lunged, trying to grab her in both hands, aiming to crush her in a single motion. But she rolled again, this time swinging upward with all her strength. The rod hit the side of his neck, and a blinding burst of energy knocked him sideways. He crashed into the stone wall of the arena and fell to his knees. Silence. Then a slow, stunned gasp from the audience. Nyari stood a few steps away, panting, her arms shaking from the effort, her legs sore, but her eyes locked on her opponent. Rokan tried to rise but stumbled. His breathing was heavy. He looked up at her with disbelief. "You should not be able to." Nyari didn't let him finish. She took a running start, flipped into the air, and landed behind him. She thrust the rod into the small of his back with one final burst. The energy pulse was too much. Rokan collapsed face first into the dust and did not rise. The arena was still. Then the sound of applause began, not from everyone, but from enough. It started as a few surprised claps and grew into a wave of cheering. Even some who had laughed at her now stood with hands raised, clapping for the smallest victor the arena had ever seen. Up on the balcony, Cole let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His grin was wide, his heart proud. "That's my girl," he muttered. In the center of the arena, Nyari looked up at the stands. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, her stun rod still glowing faintly in her grip. She was bruised, exhausted, and aching in places she didn't know could ache. But she had done it. She had won. Not with strength, not with size, but with intelligence, courage, and belief in herself. And she had proven to an entire galaxy that being small did not mean being weak. As she walked slowly back to the tunnel, the crowd's cheers still ringing behind her, she passed by General Thurak. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes, cold and bitter, said it all. He had lost more than a match. He had lost his control over the story, and Nyari had just rewritten it. The days after the arena match felt like walking through a dream. Princess Nyari, once ignored in every corridor and laughed out of every meeting, now found herself greeted with nods, quiet smiles, and curious glances that felt more like respect than ridicule. Delegates who hadn't known her name were now speaking it with care. It was strange, overwhelming, and at times almost too much. But Nyari had no time to rest. Her victory had opened a door, but keeping it open was another matter entirely. Sergeant Cole Danner stayed close. He noticed things Nyari didn't. Whispers in shadowed corners, long stares from angry diplomats, a Dravik's guard who stood just a little too still. "They're watching you," he told her one evening as they walked the quiet paths behind the assembly dome. And not just with curiosity, with fear. And fear makes people dangerous. Nyari nodded. "They fear losing control. They fear you proving you never needed their permission in the first place," Cole replied. That night, under the blue glow of Talaros's twin moons, Nyari gathered representatives from smaller races in a quiet meeting chamber. They were species long ignored. The soft-spoken Aarons, the quick-minded Threlly, the peaceful Jard. All of them had faced the same condescension, the the same rejection. Now, they were listening. Nyari stood before them, not as a warrior, but as proof. She told them calmly and clearly that unity was their strength, that their silence had cost them too much and that together they could no longer be ignored. They didn't all agree. Some were afraid, some weren't ready, but many nodded, some even openly hopeful. And by the time the gathering ended, a new coalition had been born, a voice for the overlooked, a challenge to the old ways. Nyari had not just won a battle, she had started something much larger. But not everyone welcomed change. In the shadows of the city, General Thurak's fury boiled. His champion had fallen, his pride had cracked, and now his control over the IE. Assembly's balance was slipping. He met with his private guards in a dark chamber lit by molten stone. "She humiliated us," he growled. "And now she spreads her poison to others. That cannot continue." The plan was clear. Make it look like an accident. A late-night stroll gone wrong. A political tragedy, nothing more. No blood on his hands, just a lesson in silence. That same night, Nyari walked alone in the gardens beside the assembly hall. The flowers shimmered under the soft moonlight, and the sounds of the city were distant. For once, she felt peace, until she heard the footsteps. Slow, heavy, wrong. She turned. 3 Dravix enforcers stood blocking the exit path, their glowing skin lighting the space like red fire. "Princess," one said, his voice like a low drum. "The general sends his regards." Nyari's heart raced. She stepped back, but another figure blocked the path behind her. She was surrounded. No guards, no witnesses. Just her and the quiet threat of violence. "You won your fight." One of them sneered. "Now we end the game." But before they could step forward, a bright flash lit the path and a familiar voice rang out. "Step away from her." Cole stood at the far side of the garden, blaster drawn, eyes cold. He walked forward slowly, the weapon steady. "Touch her, and I'll make sure your general regrets it." The enforcers hesitated. One reached forward, but a warning shot scorched the ground between them. "I don't bluff," Cole said flatly. The Dravix looked at each other, then backed away, with quiet growls disappearing into the shadows. Nyari exhaled, her legs shaking. Cole was beside her in a second. "You okay?" She nodded, then paused. "No, I'm tired. I'm scared. But I'm not quitting." Cole gave a half smile. "Good. Because they're more scared of you than you are of them." The next day, the assembly held its final vote. Nyari stood before them again, not alone this time, but surrounded by the new alliance of smaller worlds she had brought together. The room was quiet. The Dravix glared. Others watched with quiet interest. Nyari spoke clearly. "The strength of the galaxy is not in the hands of the few, but in the hearts of the many. We ask not to replace the powerful, but to be heard beside them." When the votes came in, the chamber held its breath. By a narrow margin, the coalition was accepted as an official council within the assembly. The room erupted in applause. Later that evening, Nyari and Cole stood on the highest balcony of the city watching the stars. "You did it," Cole said. "No," Nyari replied. "We did it." He looked at her, smiling. "The galaxy isn't going to forget your name," she smiled back. "Then let's make sure they remember it for the right reasons." Above them, the stars shimmered in the dark, and this time, they didn't seem so far away.